mentioned before, how can, with these very quickly happening events nowadays, the coronavirus, the 5G, the smart grid, the everything that is happening now by the cabal, by the globalists, by the Jesuits, I don't know even how to call them anymore, How can we, again, help people to see that what's happening now in the world with the coronavirus, with the 5G, how it all coming together, how it's all connected?
Well, the only way that you can let people see what's happening is to put that information in front of them, which is why this censorship out of Silicon Valley through the internet is getting more and more extreme because they don't want people to have access to that. But those of us who are trying to do it just have to keep trying to do it, just have to keep doing it. And cumulatively, it has an effect. I mean, I sit in this little room, spend most of my life here when I'm not out talking. And you put stuff out all the time, day after day after day, and you don't realize until you actually go out and meet people all over the world just how far it gets out. I mean, how many people watch your interviews and are affected by them and think differently as a result of them. And so I can only go by the number of people from different walks of life, very different walks of life, who stop me in the street and the supermarket, talking about this information, saying they watch the videos and how much it's opened their mind. It's only then you realize what this daily apparent grind of more and more and more, where it actually gets. So I talk about the microphone people, and these are those that dominate the microphones. They dominate the mainstream microphones and cameras, and because of that, they overwhelmingly give a certain view of the world and a certain opinion of what should happen. And if you only watch that, you can get a enormously false impression of where people in general are at, because the vast majority of people do not get access to microphones. And one of the reasons is that if they have a different opinion to the narrative, the official narrative, the microphones are basically barred from them. I mean, when you look at me, I was a journalist for a long time, mainstream journalist. I know how it works. And if you were purely going on journalistic decision making, then there are many programs in the mainstream that I would be on giving a different opinion about world events. But I'm on none of them because I am giving a different opinion about world events. It's cause and effect.
Black Swan.
Now, that means that the microphone voices absolutely do not reflect the perceptions of the mainstream, or massive parts now of the mainstream population. And so and Twitter's another one. Most people in the world don't go on Twitter, me included. My son's put news stories on there, but I don't go in there. I've got better things to do, actually, like uncovering more and more. But if you go on Twitter, the shrill voices again will give you a certain view of how things are. But most people don't go on Twitter. And when you talk to people, as they say, in the street, you find a totally different view of all these things. Yeah, for instance, political correctness. The shrill voices absolutely promote it because it's manipulating the population to silence itself. This whole transgender explosion, where you can't say this word or that word, and all the rest of it, that's pushed by the shrill voices of the microphones. But out in the world, the real world, if you like, people are saying it's madness, all this stuff.
Yeah.
So you've got two completely different views of reality. One dominated by the microphones, and one that never gets access to the microphones. And people need to realize that when they think differently to the norm, they're not alone. Not only are they not alone, their number is getting bigger and bigger by the day.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point, because I think, yesterday I think I thought this, it crossed my mind that if we are all to disconnect from computer even, from internet, from social networks, from obviously the news, the mainstream news, I think things will be much better. We live our life in a more peaceful way, and we can express ourselves, and we see that our neighbors are like us, and we won't be, brainwashed by, not just by the mainstream media or by the microphones people, but also from the social networks and all that we have in the past 10, 15 years that is flooding our brain, which is, it's almost unbelievable what is happening now in the world if you follow this narrative of the social networks. And that's what I thought yesterday, and you just reinforced this, because it's absolutely true what you just said. If you go and speak to your neighbor or the other guy in the street, they will think like you. It's like, wow, it's unbelievable, the politically correctness and the transgender story. And, we have this also in Israel. Everything that happens out there in English or in Spanish or in whatever, it happens the same in Israel.
Yeah, exactly.
We are not different.
Because
we are not different. We're part of it.
It's a global agenda. That's the point.
Yes.
And, because I've traveled so much, I've been to so many countries, 60 odd countries, you're able, and of different cultures, different backgrounds, you're able to see the common themes everywhere.
Yes.
It's a global agenda.
Yes.
And why would something be happening here in the same way it's happening there when the culture's different? They're in different parts of the world. It's because of this web, this global web that I talk about.
And this is also, I try to tell, activists or semi-activists who want to go to the local council and speak about the 5G, the LED street lights, the new antennas, the microcells, the phased array, the what have you. I tell them, listen, you're not an expert in these fields, but you just come as a parent, as a worrying parent about the future and the children, etc. Just one of the major points you need to remember, the same stuff that is happening in your town, this deployment of 5G weapon system or technology, or it doesn't matter now how you call it, the same thing is happening in at least 193 countries at the same time by corporations. So you think it's just here, and you think you can do something, but you ask your mayor or the local councillors, you ask them, how can they explain that it's happening worldwide? And they think it's only in their little town. It's not. It's an action run by big, huge cartels all over. And our health and our well-being is not their first priority. So you just come as a normal human being, a normal parent, and say what you have to say. You are allowed to.
It's the last priority, human well-being. It's the last priority. That's the point. And of course, what you have is, again, compartmentalization.
Yeah. Divide and conquer. Yes.
But what you have is the vast majority of politicians are not knowingly working for this end.
Sure.
They are ignorant of the end. They are ignorant of the forces that are directing the world. And they are manipulating, yes, but for their own ends. What they don't realize is that the cumulative bringing together of those ends fits into this whole global agenda. So what you do is you set the narrative. So, for instance, this is a good example. You set the narrative out of this global cult of human caused climate change and how we're all going to die. What you then do is you bring a 16-year-old Greta Thunberg out of Sweden, totally manipulated. I mean, if people knew the background to Greta Thunberg, they'd
Sure.
never listen to a word. And I'm not having a go at her. She's just a pawn in a game she doesn't
Sure.
understand. She says, listen to the science. She has no idea what the science is, only what she's been told. And so what you're doing with Greta Thunberg is you're trying or using her to encompass as many young people around the world as possible, to believe that older people, because you want this division between older people and young, you want divisions between every aspect of society, divide and rule. You want them to blame older people for the fact that they're all going to die in this climate catastrophe, which is actually not going to happen and isn't happening. It's all a hoax and can be taken apart very simply. And what happens then is once the narrative enters society, the politicians start responding to the narrative. Now, some of them will know that it's a scam and will be agents of this cult, and thus they will push it knowing it's a scam. The vast majority of politicians will push it because they don't know any better, and because the narrative has entered perception through pure repetition and lies, that if they're going to get elected, then and have political credibility, well, they better support the narrative. And this is how it works. Once you set the narrative, it basically becomes what I call a perceptual motion machine, a perceptual perpetual motion machine. It runs itself. And when you then have control of the media, mainstream media, and most important today, the Silicon Valley media, then the narrative is not only pounded out 24/7, but those challenging the narrative are censored and marginalized. This is how it works, and it's important I think to make this point. People say that we're heading towards a fascistic, communistic world. And on one level we are, but it's different to the fascism, communism that we've become used to. What they are developing is known as a technocracy. And a technocracy is a world that is controlled by experts, engineers, scientists through technology. And what's happening, if you look at it, is that the technologists are taking power from elected officials, coming back to what you said about local council, etc. You look at national governments, you look at Trump and British government, whatever, Silicon Valley has far more power over world events and the direction of the world already than do elected politicians. And the idea that is to erode the power of politicians to the point where the technocrats control everything via a smart grid, a technological smart grid in which AI runs everything. So one of the things that people need to watch, because this is a complete psychological mind game we're looking at. That's where it's all working at psychologically. So if you want rid of politicians, what you do is you discredit politicians in the eyes of the public. And you do that by ensuring that not very bright people or corrupt people end up massively in positions of political power. And by their actions, which are actually pushing your agenda forward, they will discredit themselves in the eyes of the public. What you're doing now is you're making the public open to another way of running the world, and therefore through technocrats and experts and AI.
I want to add to that because you touched upon a very important point, which I also covered in another interview with Patrick Wood. If you know him, he wrote extensively about.
Patrick Wood. He writes a lot about the technocracy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But also, again, it's not instead. It goes in parallel and it also entangled together quite well. using, I would say, a software, not in the computer sense, but a software in our brain, which is called communitarianism, which is the combination of old communism with new capitalism into communitarianism, which is basically convincing the sole person that the good of community sometimes is much more important than his own interest. Like, for example, and by the way, I'm saying it's a software because very slowly it enters the language. Very slowly, it's still not officially presented in various countries, but it will be. And software, because this will enter our brain, it's already there in Agenda 21. For example, sustainability or smart growth. All these changing of the language is part of communitarianism. Now you get the sun there on your face.
This is my lighting system.
Exactly.
Window.
This is the best one.
Yeah, but of course, I'm sitting here, and the sun is coming through the window, and it's getting warm. But the climate models that tell us that the demon is carbon dioxide do not include the effect on the sun.
Of the sun, yes.
Of making things hotter. So I mean, I've just noticed. I've noticed it before, that when the sun comes out, it gets warmer. But and if you don't factor in the sun into that climate change modelling, then you're obviously scamming. And by the way, just on that subject, so we're changing the subject because the sun's coming out. But on that subject, you know the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that basically through the UN has driven this climate change hoax. Its brief from the start is not to explain climate change, it's to investigate the human impact on the climate. And that's one reason why they don't talk about the sun, because they're only gathering information, actually mendacity, about the human impact and not the elemental impact.
But you know, this sort of way of thinking and acting. It's not just theirs, because, for example, the telecommunication industries, they're not talking about the effects of radiation, but about the attitude that people have about the effect of radiation. So they ignore, well, they obviously do it for a purpose, ignoring the actual hazard and the health impacts of radiation on us with all the gadgets and all the smartphones and all the routers, etc. But they're talking more about, and this is how they're diverting and twisting the language as well in our way of thinking, for us to think about our attitude towards the dangers of radiation. There's no conclusive evidence. It's not stabilized any still. We need to wait a few more years, like the tobacco industry done a few decades ago. They're doing it again, just with a different industry. But all in all, really, I wanted us to go because I see the sun, and if there's no cloud coming very soon, so I don't know how much we can. All right. I mean, it's England after all. One cloud or the other will come. Without weather modification, just on its own. I just wanted your input, obviously, in context of what we're talking now, about the coronavirus. And before you go there, I just want to say that a couple of days ago, I interviewed Mark Steele, which, you know, from Gateshead.
Right.
And he basically, it was a very short talk, like 20 minutes, and he spoke about the fact that the name corona, the meaning of corona, besides the beer, etc., it's electrical discharge of high power electrical cables or machine. So if you think about, I mean, if you go on Google, you look for corona, not virus, just corona, you see it's a technical term, And it means electrical discharge of high power cables or high power machine or something like that. And you think about the 5G, and you think about all the electrical, well, devices we have nowadays, and we are planning to have more and more. Corona, it's electrical discharge. And it's like, how does that connected to the coronavirus spreading in Wuhan area where there's a lot of 5G installments and deployments? And one can only think about this coincidence. But I just wanted to ask you, what's your input about the corona? Is it real? What do you think about it? Because I believe no one, really. I believe not the mainstream media, neither the alternative media, because I don't believe no one in that sense.
Well, I think it's still up in the air about what it is and where it came from. What you can say is that insiders, I've quoted them in the books over the years, have said that putting out viruses, injecting them in vaccination programs, is part of the agenda because it allows so many things to happen of an authoritarian nature to protect people from the virus. And because the crucial bottom line technique of manipulation is to exploit the human fear of death and the unknown, you will have great chunks of the population supporting absolutely fascistic happenings in the belief that it will protect them from what they've been manipulated to fear. So this whole virus and the hysteria surrounding it is already allowing governments to forcibly put people into, in effect, prisons. And we can debate whether that's the right thing to do or whatever, but the point is that it allows them to do it. And so if you have a virus that continues to expand, that allows you to continually expand your authoritarianism with the excuse of fighting the virus. But where I would like to go is what you've just brought up, because it's very important. All of my books that talk about the world and world events include the background to the nature of reality, because without one you can't understand the other. You certainly can't understand the potential of what's happening in the other. And so once you realize that the base form of the body is an electromagnetic field, yes, and that the brain and the body and the cellular system communicates electrically, and our perceptions are formed in the brain electrically, then you realize that the brain and the body are operating on particular frequencies, and that if you can project technological frequencies that will impact and distort the body frequencies and the brain frequencies, you will affect the way people think or struggle to think straight, and you will affect health. Another thing that people need to realize is that everything in our reality is a frequency on that wave field electromagnetic level. And every emotion, excuse me, every emotion is a frequency. Every thought is a different frequency depending on the thought. And every illness, virus, is a frequency. And therefore, you can deliver viruses in the form of frequency. If you deliver the frequency on which the virus is operating and you connect that into the human energetic field, that energetic field will start vibrating in sympathy with that virus frequency, and the if you like, physical, not that there is such a thing, but the physical expression of that will be that the person suddenly goes down with a virus. So
Mm.
we should realize that what happens in terms of um, chemical reaction in the body is actually just a chemical manifestation of a frequency energetic change in the body. And through this, frequencies can deliver viruses. And the more powerfully the frequency is delivered, the more impact it will
Impact.
have. And this brings us round to 5G, which is taking that power onto a whole new level.
It's even more, first of all, it's what I say to the community I have in Israel, that first of all, the foundation is physics. Chemistry and biology are secondary, meaning our electromagnetic field, this is, and our light environment and our water environment, these are all physics, and they establish how our chemistry will be and how our biology will be. So first of all is which frequency we live in, which electromagnetic field we live in. So it correlates with what you just said. And secondly,
what it also correlates with is how, in my lifetime, we've gone from negligible technological radiation in the atmosphere to phenomenal radiation, not least through Wi-Fi. And that is affecting human perception and it's affecting human health all the time.
Spot on. Absolutely. Before we were talking about technocracy and communitarianism, and I wanted to add something that will come to this Corona story and the 5G story. The main thing that I see that this cabal or the global elites, what they want is they want people to ask for their taking control of the situation. Like the problem, reaction, solution. So they're already ready with the solution. They want people to ask, please save us, government, please save us, state, or please save us, pharmaceutical companies, and produce a vaccine for us.
Yeah, the vaccine for this coronavirus
already
it will already exist.
Sure.
It already exists. We're trying to find it. No, it already exists. That's the scam.
Yeah, if it is a virus at all, I mean, maybe just a frequency. I really don't know because I believe
one and the other are the same.
I believe no one. Yeah. And I think, I mean, what is happening now, I know people in Israel, they told me, look, if you don't want to vaccinate your child, that's fine. And I tell them, all right, but you vaccinate your kids. And I'm like, yes, I choose my vaccines. I'm like, okay, I don't intervene here. And I tell them, but if a time will come that they will force all of us to vaccinate, will you vaccinate? And they're like, no way, I'm against forced vaccination. I bet you, David, that the same people, they are now in favor of forced vaccinations because they are so afraid from this story of coronavirus. And this is what the global elite want us to reach, this point that each neighbor will force someone else to vaccinate because he's too afraid. So people against people. And this is, I think this is horrible. I really think it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's obviously part of what is planned to happen. It's already happening. People who are called so-called anti-vaxxers, who are just intelligent people who are doing their own research into the background to vaccinations and potential consequences for their children, they're being increasingly demonized because this brings us to another psychological trick scam, and that is you are free to make choices so long as you make the choices we want you to make. Once you start making choices that we do not want you to make, then we make the choice we want compulsory. And so while people were taking up vaccinations on a big scale, a massive scale, still are, but there are people pushing back against that.
Sure.
Then you are free to do as we tell you. See, it's freedom. Oh no, we've got choice. Once more and more people start making the choice, actually, I'm not letting my kids get vaccinated, I've seen the consequences and potential consequences, then suddenly choice is no longer in the equation because we're going to make them compulsory now. And what they do, of course, is you point out there, they demonize the parents who care enough for their kids to do their own research, to get the parents who just buy the official narrative to pressure and to demonize them so that everyone is forced into it. We have a situation in Britain where the Secretary of Health, who's just a puppet, he'll be a secretary of something else eventually,
Sure.
is saying he is considering mandatory vaccinations. I don't think he realizes the pushback he's going to get. And we have a law officer who has said that she is considering making basically criticism, exposure of vaccines a criminal offence.
Yeah, I heard your video about that.
Yeah. Now, you know, these people come and go, but you know, the idea. See, what you have is you have the institution, and the institution is running the show, and you have then people coming in and out of the institution, which the institution is deciding who comes in and who comes out. And a lot of that is on the basis of are they going to push the agenda, which we represent, or are they going to be easily manipulatable to go that way? This is what happens with government ministers often. And so when this law officer comes out and this Secretary of State for Health, and they say, considering mandatory vaccinations, considering anti-vaccine is a criminal offence, they are merely the vehicles. It's coming out of the institution. It's coming out of the cult. And they're just vehicles to express it and to impose it. And both of those people have no idea, clearly, the amount of pushback they're going to get, because they are.
It's same in Israel. I do hope we have a proper pushback against this, against this will to make this decision, like compulsory vaccines. But already the Prime Minister of Israel declared that for the coronavirus, which is again another reason I see for false flag operation, we are going to build up a vaccine manufacturing industry here in Israel.
And the question is, what's in it? What's in it? What's in the vaccine? A very tiny few people have to know what's in the vaccine for it to circulate globally through people who have no idea what's in the vaccine, but just administer it.
And most parents don't want even to read the leaflet saying what's in the vaccines. They don't want to know. They just believe.
Like aborted fetal tissue in vaccines. How many people know that?
For example.
And this is a point that I think it's very important to make. You know, one of the ways that people try to demonize me is to say that I'm anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic. And they do that because it's a protection mechanism to stop legitimate investigation into this global web.
Fair point.
What needs to happen is that the Jewish community and the American community and the British community and the South African community need to realize that we are all in the gun sights of this. And we have designer censorship. So if they don't want you not to make the choice to vaccinate your children, they will demonize people who are pointing out why it's dangerous. And if you don't want people who are connected to Israel and part of this web, which is global, to be exposed, then you protect those people by saying anyone that exposes them is an anti-Semite. Instead of exposing some people who are Jewish, you are actually condemning the entire global Jewish population, which of course is the last thing I'm doing, as you well know. But this is what we need to do is just put the fault lines down, because they want to divide us. Oh, we're not listening to that David Icke, he's anti-Semitic. Well, actually, I'm not, full enough. And just look at how we're all affected. You know, there are absolutely there is an agenda against the white race, quite clearly. And I say that as someone who looks at my body, whatever color it is, as just a vehicle for my consciousness, the true I, to experience this reality. I don't get into race. I think it's an illusion. These labels that we give ourselves and are given is an illusion. However,
Sure.
if we're going to be streetwise about the manipulation, we have to recognize that certain things are happening because the evidence is overwhelming. Now, what you could have, and in some cases you do have, is when, for instance, in political correctness, you cannot say anything about any race except white. Say what you like about them. You cannot say anything about any religion except Christianity.
Yes.
You say what you like about that, and I say that as an absolutely. I'm not a Christian. I'm not religious in any way. So why is that? And what you can get, I'm talking about this divide and rule.
Mm-hmm.
You can get people who are not white and not Christian have no problem with that. Oh,
Yeah.
not my problem. Oh, yeah, quite right. What they don't realize is that which is pursuing that agenda against white people and Christianity is also what plans to pursue the agenda against them.
Against them,
And
yes.
I would say to black people in America, the forces that created slavery, so phone's ringing here, the forces
Sorry.
that created slavery and took you to America as slaves are the same forces
Same.
that are now demonizing the white race, because that is the stage of the agenda that's going on now. We need to come together, all of us, and realize that we're all in the gun sights, whatever stage and emphasis might be happening at one stage or another.
And this morning, was it this morning or yesterday? I don't remember. I put up the symbol of the round table, Cecil Rhodes and Milner, well, obviously, and I put this symbol on Facebook, and I wrote what to do, what to do that Cecil Rhodes and Milner were sent by the Rothschild to build up all this network. What to do that it's by the Rothschild. So already I got like a couple of comments which are against me, as if I'm anti-Semitic. And I'm like, listen, guys, I didn't make the facts. I mean, it's the Rothschild did it, not me. And it's not about Jewish people, because they don't care that whether they're Jews or not. It doesn't matter. They're beyond religion because they are in the cult of whatever they do there. But
I mean, the point you've made already is that what's happening to the rest of the world by this cabal, this cult, is happening to the people of Israel.
Of course, everyone, sure,
right.
Sure.
So we're all in the gun sights, and what they want is for us to fight among ourselves and censor each other, so that they get a free run. And the idea that we've reached the point, as you just mentioned, where to criticize a banking dynasty as part of a banking system that has absolutely hijacked human society, the idea that you can't criticize those people who've done that, like the Rothschilds, on the basis of that's anti-Semitic, shows beyond question that this is not about protecting Jewish people from discrimination. It's about protecting the cult from exposure. And another confirmation of that is that those Jewish people that speak out against the extremes in the governments of Israel, etc., are targeted even more vociferously and with more abuse than non-Jewish people who are saying it. So many people in the British Labour Party that have been thrown out for anti-Semitism have been Jewish.
Yes, it's true. It's true.
Because it's a scam.
I wanted to ask you, to tell the audience a couple of things. One is, I think you had a new book coming out or came out already a couple of months ago.
It came out a short while ago, called The Trigger, and it's explosive. It describes who actually did 9/11, and it wasn't 19 Arab hijackers. And in exposing that, it exposes the whole story. And Israel is very much involved in that. When I say Israel, I don't mean the people of Israel. I mean the forces that have hijacked Israel, in my view, are very much involved in that. And let's say people like Netanyahu get lots of mentions. And this is a big, big, big point. I say several times in the book, in the trigger, no one needs to read this book more urgently than the Jewish community, because they have been hijacked by these people. And as I explain in the book, the secret society, the satanic secret society behind it, actually hate Jewish people. And what they do, their modus operandi is infiltration. They'll infiltrate a community posing as that community and manipulate themselves into control of that community, while another wing is manipulating themselves into control of another community that appears to be in opposition to the other community.
Yeah, sure.
So as I point out in the book, the same secret society, satanic secret society, that controls Israel, controls Saudi Arabia. Saudi royal family, the House of Saud, a fake royal family, are operatives of the same secret society that controls Israel, at the same secret society that controls the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, etc. So these are moving as one unit, so once you realise that, then we can put the fault lines down, because the same network that's controlling America is controlling Israel, is controlling Saudi Arabia, is controlling Britain.
And also, just to disperse any thoughts in viewers' minds, especially the Israeli ones or the Jewish ones, I must make a point, which is, if there's something that the globalists really want now, is to erase all countries. We know that. I mean, it's one world government. So I know that you and me here, we are on the same page, which is all countries, including Israel, obviously, needs to stay a country, not to give their control to a global government. So I'm all for Israel, and I'm sure you are as well. I'm all against a tyranny or a fascist government that is actually following the agenda of a global government. I'm all against that, and I know you are too.
I would say this, if you put kind of reasonable Jewish people in Israel in a room with reasonable Palestinian people, and you let them talk, you'd find that they had enormously more in common than they had on the other side. And if you talk for long enough, they'd realize that they are actually all part of the same human family. And if you go deeper than that, you'd find that we're all points of attention in the same state of infinite awareness consciousness, having a brief experience as a label, whether it's called Jewish or Arab or British or Black South African. These are just brief experiences for the same consciousness.
And they don't really matter. Don't really matter.
No, the cult has to divide and rule us. So it divides and rules us on the basis of labels, religious labels, cultural labels. Now, that's absolutely not a condemnation of different cultures. I love it. It's an experience. We ought to celebrate the fact that we have different cultures. What we are witnessing, whether it's Jewish people and the Jewish culture or whatever culture it is we're seeing a monoculture globally imposed upon us through this technocracy and through this Silicon Valley tyranny, which has enormous connections to Israel, of course, and Beersheba and and that whole cyber center that Netanyahu's reign has created.
Also, I've been getting in recent months, I've been getting some comments on my YouTubes regarding Israel is leading the 5G thing.
Yeah, well, not necessarily 5G, although it's part of it. But I've quoted in the trigger because part of the way that 9/11 was pulled off was by totally controlling the American government, military, and the civilian air traffic control computer system. I show in the book how it was done. So what people were seeing on the computer screens while the 9/11 hijacks were happening was not necessarily what was happening in the sky.
Sure.
What I do is I quote Netanyahu because Netanyahu has spoken a number of times to the choir, people who want to hear what he says. And these have been APAC conferences, these in America, these have been cyber conferences. And I've strung together a lot of the things that he said. And he's actually said that that basically Israel is now number 2 in the world. He doesn't want it to stay like that in terms of cyber. And this Beersheba operation, which is military and Mossad in nature, in control. He has said they are trawling people, young people, from the universities who have aptitudes in this arena. When they go into the military, they spend their time in that area, and then they go off into Silicon Valley companies or startups. I mean, Israel in terms of cyber is now basically startup nation.
Yeah.
And so yes, there's an enormous influence on the whole grid out of Israel from the mouth of Benjamin Netanyahu, and that doesn't mean that the goal is to make that good for Israel, because the people that run Israel are the same global network that runs Saudi Arabia and America and all the others.
England,
all of it, absolutely.
Yeah, sure. That's what I wanted to say now, just to make clear that it's not Israel as a state. It's using, the global force is using Israel to promote his agenda.
Well,
full stop. I mean, it's the same way it's using the CIA, the Mossad, the MI6. Yeah. It's using the social services as well. It's all the same tentacle. Well, the different tentacles of the same octopus.
See, if you look at the different countries, say you've got Israel and you've got Saudi Arabia and you've got America and you've got Britain and France, and you see it at that level, and then you go one step higher, and at that level, all those are just fiefdoms of the same force. So the if you like, those that take the consequences of this force in Israel are just the same as those taking the consequences of this force in France and America and Germany.
Exactly. It's not to blame Israel or Jewish people. It's just companies that what to do there in Israel.
Right, secret society.
And Israel is, I can say Israel is the sixth eye alliance. After the Five Eyes alliance, there's also Israel, which is maybe the little brother or sister, maybe becoming bigger now, of this octopus that really is coming from the city of London, if I think about it. Are you aware, by the way, are you familiar with the work of Dean Henderson?
Yeah, I've come across Dean, yeah.
All right, so he's been talking about, I interviewed him a few good times now, and he's been talking about the city of London and Serco. Do you know Serco company?
Yeah, I've come across that. The city of London is one of the great centres of this.
For many years now.
Yeah, many years. Long time. I mean, this whole global conspiracy is not something that started yesterday. Or even in the 20th century. It goes back a long
many centuries. Yes.
The city of London is a massive centre, but there are others too. But I mean,
sure.
Look at Babylon, and Babylon had an empire because Babylon was a a center for the cult. Look at Rome. Well, the Babylonian cult, if you like, moved into Rome, and Rome had its empire. It was the empire of
Sure.
the cult.
Sure.
The cult then moved on into Britain, stayed in. I mean, the Vatican is still a massive centre for it, but it moved into Britain. And what did Britain have? The British Empire. It was the empire of the cult. And
Sure,
these other
sure.
European empires. The cult then moved in on America, and now America is an empire, although it's not officially an empire, but you
Yeah.
see where its troops and influence is all over the world.
Sure.
And so you're looking at this same force that's been behind all of this stuff, and you look at Israel. I mean, just from a purely dispassionate point of view, and you see the size of Israel, you see the population of Israel, and then you look at the influence of Israel worldwide, which is colossally greater than the size of its number and the size of its land. Why is that possible? Because it's not Israel that has the power. It's the cult that controls through Israel that has the power.
I agree. And that's why we are all in this together against this tyranny and against this global power.
Absolutely.
We need to cooperate here. I'm against. Everybody say we need to unite, and I'm like, no, we need to cooperate, but I don't think we need to unite, because once we unite, it's very easy to tackle what we are trying to do. When we are separated but cooperating, it's much more difficult to follow us and see what we are doing.
I mean, this is the difference. People see globalization and the centralization incessantly of global power as the world coming together. No, it's not.
Yeah. No.
I'm all in favor of global bodies that coordinate cooperation.
Exactly. Yes.
But when you have global bodies that dictate, then you have a vehicle, a structure for a tiny, tiny few people to dictate to everyone else, which is why they want a world government, a world central bank, a world army, etc.
Can you tell us just a quick word about Iconic, the alternative?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm delighted with it because I've not created this. My son Jamie has created this, and it's an absolutely fantastic thing. It's a media platform which already has a fantastic amount of video information on it, and series on it, and documentaries on it, and he's just going off around the world shortly to complete the filming of one on 5G and Wi-Fi and all that stuff, talking to world experts on it. And that's going to be coming in the next few weeks. Basically, what prompted it was the incessant censorship through vehicles like YouTube and whatever. And we needed to create something, and he has created it, that will be a place where people can access this information as the, if you like, the mainstream internet sources continually get removed from in terms of circulating alternative information. And if people go to iconic.com or davidicke.com, they'll find out more about it. But I mean, I was looking at it this morning. I mean, the amount of stuff on there, and it's being added to all the time. We have weekly programs and what have you, is unbelievable. He's done an amazing job.